The Cleveland Browns finished the 2023 season with an 11-6 record and made the playoffs for the first time since 2020. Their playoff appearance this past year was just their third playoff appearance this century, and despite the 45-14 loss to the Texans in the wildcard round of the playoffs, it was a very successful season for the Browns, all things considered. If you would have told any Browns fan in Week 1 that they would be in the playoffs with Joe Flacco as their starting quarterback, Jaron Christian as one of their tackles, and James Hudson as their other, due to how many injuries they had, I don't think they would have believed you. And now that the injury-riddled season is behind us, the Cleveland Browns' success in 2024 largely relies on quarterback Deshaun Watson. I know the Browns have been heralded at times as a very underrated team, and that they're a lot of people's sleeper pick to make a deep postseason run, but if this team can stay healthy, and if Deshaun Watson can be a serviceable quarterback, not even a great quarterback, but a serviceable quarterback, they're going to be a very difficult team to beat on any given Sunday. The Browns defense is without a doubt one of the best in all of football, and as long as the offense does not commit multiple turnovers in 7 out of the final 8 games, like they did last year, the defense is going to feast and the pass rush is going to routinely get after the quarterback. But how will the Browns do this year? Well, we're going to break it down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by breaking down who the Browns signed in free agency and who they lost in free agency. The biggest signing they made was bringing back veteran Za'Darius Smith, who has aged like fine wine over the course of his NFL career. Bringing back Za'Darius was great for both him and the team, as Za'Darius had 60 pressures last year, along with 20 quarterback hits. There weren't many teammates who had 60 plus pressures last year, but Za'Darius and Miles were one of a handful. Bringing Za'Darius back on a 2-year, $23 million deal was a great deal for Cleveland, as they get a really good second pass rusher behind Miles, and a guy who has been around for a long time and knows how to get home. Unfortunately, Za'Darius only had 5.5 sacks last year, and I say that with quotations around only, because Za'Darius was a really productive player for Cleveland last year, and I think bringing him back was essential for their 2024 success. They also brought back veteran Shelby Harris, which wasn't a flashy signing by any means, but it was key that they brought back a player who started 7 games for them last year, and a veteran who most certainly knows his role. And it's never bad to have defensive line depth in today's era either. But one move in particular that I really liked, well, 2, and we'll get to the other soon, but I really liked the addition of veteran linebacker Jordan Hicks. I not only liked this signing because he's a good player, but I think he will really pair well with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and the fact that Cleveland brought him in for just $8 million over the course of 2 years. Yes, Jordan Hicks is 32 years old now, and yes, he can fall off at any point, but he played at a very high level during this time in Minnesota over the past 2 years, and he's been playing at a high level for most of his career. We will break down the defense more in a minute, and man do I love this unit, but I also really liked the Jameis Winston signing too. Having a viable backup quarterback in a 17-game season is critical, and we saw what happened just 4 snaps into the Jets season last year, and not every quarterback or backup quarterback is Joe Flacco. And having Jameis be able to back up Deshaun if the worst case scenario happens again, well, I think Jameis is one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league, and to be honest, I think he's better than a few starters around the league, and you can probably think of a few too. As for the losses the Browns had in free agency, the main losses are defensive tackle Jordan Elliott, linebacker Sione Takitaki, quarterback Joe Flacco, and tight end Harrison Bryant. Jordan Elliott is an okay player at best, and he was a 3rd-round pick back in 2020, and his production is very easily replaceable. Takitaki was a solid linebacker and a player who will certainly contribute in New England, but with how loaded this Browns defense is, I say this truly in the nicest way possible and with respect to the current players on the Browns defense, but Takitaki leaving is not going to be that noticeable in the grand scheme of things. He's a solid player and will be around the league for a while, but losing him is not the end of the world. Now, I wasn't surprised to see the Browns let Joe Flacco walk in free agency, and I really think if Deshaun had a bad start to the 2024 season, and if Flacco were still on the roster, the crowd and the Browns fans would be clamoring for Flacco to enter a game. Not at the first sign of adversity for Deshaun, but faster than they would for Jameis Winston, due to what Flacco did for this team last year. The Browns did not have a whole lot of money, but I liked what they did with the resources they had by bringing Za'Darius back, and by going out and signing Jordan Hicks and Jameis Winston. Now, for the Browns defense entering the 2024 season, I do not say this with every team, but I legitimately think they can lead the league in points allowed per game and be a major reason as to why the Browns have success this year. I know some people get sick of hearing how the Browns are underrated every year, and I get it. But to me personally, the Browns are very underrated heading into the year, not because people are forgetting how good of a running back Nick Chubb is, or because Amari is going to have another 1,200-yard year or anything like that, but because of how dominant this defense is. And unfortunately for the Browns defense in 2023, they were set up to fail, and often. Perhaps the best game to exemplify this was the Steelers game in Week 2. The Browns outgained the Steelers by over 150 yards and held the ball for over 35 minutes in this game. The Steelers did not take an offensive snap inside the Browns' 20-yard line, and Cleveland also ran for over 195 yards as a team. Based on that alone, you would probably think the Browns won this game by 2 or 3 touchdowns, but they didn't. And because of an Alex Highsmith pick 6, a TJ Watt fumble return for a touchdown, and a 71-yard touchdown by George Pickens, the Browns ended up losing this game. They lost the turnover battle 4-2, and when you allow just 255 yards of opposing offense, and you even create multiple turnovers, you should win the game. Period. There weren't any other games for Cleveland quite as drastic as the Week 2 Steelers game, but what gets either forgotten about or simply not acknowledged from the 2023 Browns season is how often Joe Flacco turned the ball over. He had 8 interceptions on just 204 passing attempts, and if he would have thrown as many passes as the league leader in passing attempts last year, which was Sam Howell, Flacco would have thrown 24 interceptions, and the Browns quarterbacks collectively threw 24 touchdowns to 23 interceptions last year, which put the defense in a position to fail. A lot. Myles Garrett is without a doubt one of the best players in football, and he will be the anchor of this defense for 2024 and the next several years too. And I love Myles and think he is one of the most insane athletes on the planet, especially for his size. But I cannot emphasize enough how much I love this secondary. It should not be a hot take to say the Browns have the best trio of corners out of any team in the league, and they are led by Denzel Ward. Denzel is now a 3-time Pro Bowler, and Browns fans would be the first to tell you that he has been a very good player for years, and he has. But unlike other times in his career, it's not just Denzel and another corner out there. He finally has some help. Martin Emerson has been a very good corner since being a 3rd-round pick back in 2022, and Martin had 4 interceptions last year. And by the way, he did not allow a touchdown despite being targeted 70 times. Opposing quarterbacks had a passer rating of just 45.3 when targeting Emerson last year, and the Browns secondary is the epitome of a no-fly zone. Their starting nickel corner is Greg Newsome, who was their 1st-round pick back in 2021, and to put it bluntly, all of these guys are studs in the defensive backfield, and when you marry not just an okay pass rush, but a great pass rush along with 3 great corners and 2 solid safeties in Juan Thornhill and Grant Delpit, good luck trying to throw the ball against this team. I refuse to believe the Browns are going to commit 37 turnovers offensively 2 years in a row, and due in large part to this, the Browns defense will naturally be put in more advantageous situations, unlike the situations they were put in routinely last year. Cleveland allowed the fewest passing yards in 2023 and also finished 3rd in interceptions as a team. Linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah has been a player I've loved for years, and he is usually all over the football field. He led the team in tackles last year with 101, while also having 20 tackles for a loss and even tacked on 3.5 sacks. He was named a Pro Bowler for the first time, and I would expect much of the same this year. This defense has playmakers at every level, and they will routinely make opposing offenses' lives hell. There truly is no weakness on the Cleveland Browns defense. For the Browns offense in 2024, one of the big things that has to go their way, and one thing that I think will go their way more than it did in 2023, mainly because I don't think it can get worse than what it was for them last year, was health. When you think of the 2023 Browns, you may think of Joe Flacco at the end of the year leading them to a postseason appearance, or you may think of the gruesome Nick Chubb injury from week 2 against the Steelers, which we will not show, don't worry about that, or Deshaun Watson suffering a season-ending injury as well. But Nick Chubb and Deshaun Watson were not the only guys to get injured for Cleveland last year. They were down bad on the offensive line, and it started in week 1 when Jack Conklin suffered a season-ending injury against the Bengals. Now, one thing that I like for the Browns entering the 24 season is if Jedrick Wills or Jack Conklin go down this year, they have a viable third tackle in DeJuan Jones. I really like DeJuan Jones entering the 2023 season, and I thought he was going to be a good player for them. And he was when he played, but unfortunately DeJuan Jones got hurt as well. So that's going to be the big thing for Cleveland this year, is simply not having not just 1 or 2 guys go down for the year, but 6 or 7 and then have it pile up, which was awful for them to say the least. Now, the other big part, which is the elephant in the room, is how will Deshaun Watson play? We have had a handful of games for him as the Browns quarterback now, and to be completely honest, I am willing to dismiss the 2022 season, as it would be nearly impossible for anybody to come back after almost 2 full seasons and to play at the level Deshaun was pre-Browns history, but there wasn't that much of a difference between 2022 and 2023. Outside of 1 half against the Ravens, and that's a big question mark entering the year, is how much stock are you willing to put into 1 half Deshaun Watson has played with great football in the past 3 years? Because obviously he didn't play during the 2021 season, so the question is, how much does that second half against the Ravens, who were an insanely good defense last year, and a defense that I think was not just the best last year, but one of the best over the past 5 to 7 years, how much stock do you put in that half for Deshaun Watson moving forward? Now, for me personally, I'm kind of half a foot in, if you will, and if there was a scale from 0 to 100, I would probably be around 35% confident in Deshaun Watson moving forward. But what I will say is, as long as he doesn't flat out lose the Browns games this year, they're going to be a great team. And I do believe Nick Chubb will bounce back. And what also has to be remembered is the Browns receiving core, while they may not have a Tyreek Hill or a CeeDee Lamb on their team, they have Amari Cooper, who went for over 1,200 yards last year. They have David Njoku, who I believe is a pretty underrated tight end. And they also traded for Jerry Jeudy this offseason, and of course return Elijah Moore too. Now, there was some backlash when the Browns extended Jerry Jeudy and gave him $41 million guaranteed, but I don't think that was the worst thing in the world, because with the way the salary cap is going and with the way that the projection is going to increasingly go up, it's really not that big of a deal. Now, is Jerry worth however many million that was per year? You can make the argument and say, no, he's not. But look, they took a chance on him, and Jerry Jeudy was a great prospect coming out of Alabama a couple of years ago, and he has not had good quarterback play throughout his career. Will he bounce back in Cleveland? I wouldn't go that far, but I think he can be a solid 700 or 800 yard player, and if he can be a viable Robin to Amari, and really to an extension of that, David Njoku's Batman, and he can be the Robin, I think they'll be alright. If Cleveland can finish top 10 in offensive points per game last year with as many things that went wrong for them as they had, I think they can do it again this year. The bottom line for the 2024 Cleveland Browns offense is do not turn the ball over 37 times and do not put your defense in a position to lose games repeatedly. Because if they can put up 20 points, just a mere 20 points per game every game, the reality for the 2024 Browns is they'll probably go 12-5 just based off that. Based off of nothing else, if they can put up 20 points, they will have more than a winning record, and they will probably be in contention for the AFC North. And to be honest, I think they are a bit of a sleeper to win the AFC North, because everybody thinks it's going to be either the Bengals or Ravens, but as long as the Browns offense simply does their job, not less, not exceedingly more, just does their job, they're going to be fine. From a stat projection, I think Nick Chubb will go for over 1,000 yards again, and I think he'll have double-digit rushing touchdowns again. But for Deshaun Watson, I think he'll be around, assuming he plays all 17 games, I think he'll be around 3,500 yards with around 20 to 21 touchdowns, along with 10 or 11 interceptions. But the reality is, for Deshaun Watson, is this is the final year. 2022, I'm willing to toss out. 2023 was cut short. But the Browns gave him a $230 million contract and also gave the Texans 3 first-round picks, which, by the way, played a significant part in allowing them to rebuild as fast as they did. It is truly now or never time for Deshaun Watson. For the rookie impact, this is going to be a much different portion of the video than most other teams, due in large part to Cleveland not having a first-round pick. But their first pick was defensive tackle Michael Hall from Ohio State, and I absolutely loved Michael Hall as a prospect. I thought he had violent hands, and I thought he was a pretty underrated player in the 2024 draft process. I also think Michael went to a very, very good landing spot for him, and to be honest, with the Browns adding depth along the defensive line over the past few years, like they did in the 23 draft with Siaki Ika, who didn't have as much of an impact as I wanted him to have in his rookie year, I wouldn't expect all that much from Michael Hall. I think he will be a rotational pass rusher on third down. If they have a 3rd and 12, we want to get Michael Hall in for a one-on-one along the interior defensive line. But if you're expecting Michael Hall to start 10 or 11 games just because he's a second-round rookie, I don't think those are fair expectations. Now, Zach Zinter fell in the draft process. He was their 3rd-round pick. He fell a little bit due to a pre-draft injury. I like the pick, but what I'll say about this, again, with the Browns' offensive line being as loaded as it is, I wouldn't expect much contribution, and I say this, nicely, but if I were a Browns fan, I wouldn't want Zach Zinter to play in his rookie year, because that would mean either A, starter is awful, or B, like they had last year, a starter would go down with a significant injury. So I wouldn't expect much from Zach Zinter either. Jamari Thrash was an exciting prospect, or an exciting receiving prospect, but again, with the 3 receivers that they have with Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, and even a younger player in David Bell, who I liked a lot a few years ago coming out of Purdue, we're talking about a guy that maybe beat out David Bell and maybe the wide receiver 4, and I wouldn't even count on that. They had 3 picks past the 200 mark. The most notable was corner Miles Harden from South Dakota, not South Dakota State, but South Dakota, and I liked Miles a lot for, again, what he was as a draft prospect, but when you have the 3 corners in Denzel, Greg Newsome, and Martin Emerson, there's not going to be a lot of snaps for Miles to play in his rookie year. So at best, I think we're talking about a one-man draft class, at least in their rookie year. I do think Zach Zinter can start in the long run, especially with Joel Bitonio aging. But for 2024 specifically, it would be great if the Browns had maybe 25 tackles and maybe 3.5 sacks from Michael Hall as their 2nd-round pick. I would not expect much from this class, but the good news is for the Browns is their roster is very, very talented, and they don't have to have a whole lot of rookie impact to make a big run like they can this year. As for team schedules, Cleveland's could be a lot worse than what it is. They open up against Dallas in week 1, and I think that will be a game where Cleveland's defense really gets to show America how fierce they're going to be, as that's going to be the 4:25 game of the week, East Coast time, of course. They then go to Jacksonville, then they come home to play the Giants, then go to Las Vegas, then go to Washington for their first 5 games. And out of those 5, I don't think there are any that are completely unwinnable. Now, will the Browns start 5-0? That's a completely different discussion. The schedule eventually gets more difficult, and in particular, the final 4 games for Cleveland are incredibly hard, as they play Kansas City, at Cincinnati on Thursday night, versus the Dolphins, and then in Baltimore to close the season. But with the 2024 Browns, I don't look at their schedule and automatically circle a game that they cannot win, and automatically chalk them up as a loss. Now, they're obviously not going to go 17-0, and I don't think any team is going to go 17-0. Not the Chiefs, not anybody. But the Browns are going to be in every game, and if they can pound the rock, play clean football, and let the defense get after everybody, they're going to be one of the most difficult and pain in the rear end teams to play for anybody. Their defense is going to be elite this year as long as the offense does not set them up to fail. I really think this is kind of a resurgence of defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz's career, and we saw that flash at times last year. When you have a defense that has playmakers at every level, like the Browns do, like Myles Garrett, like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and you can quite literally take your choosing of any player in the secondary. We'll go with Denzel Ward because he's most known and he is a 3-time Pro Bowler. Their defense is going to be elite. They're great, and I think the Browns defense will finish in the top 5 in points per game this year, again, as long as they're not set up to fail. The Browns' ceiling for me is the AFC Championship game, simply because I don't think they're going to go on the road and win a big playoff game like a Kansas City or like a Baltimore or like a Cincinnati and win with everything on the line. But for everybody that is tired of hearing the Browns are sleepers, this is the year if they stay healthy. That's the key thing. They have not been able to stay healthy over the past few years, and in 2022, they didn't exactly have a quarterback for, well, most of the year. So for everybody that's, sick of hearing it, this will be the year if they can stay healthy. And again, I think their team ceiling is the championship game, but that's all I have for today's team preview, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 42% of people watching are subscribed. It helps the channel tremendously. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.